Professor Wolff.
Hi, how are you?
I am still here. I don't think anyone's good right now, except for those very, very wealthy people who, according to the New York Times, made a ton of money because the S&P has climbed to this record high yesterday, reaching a level that no one could have really predicted a few months ago, and basically defying the economic storm that's hitting everyone else but the super wealthy in our country. Can we talk a little bit about the vulgarity of this, of what this means that the stock prices are so high?
Yeah, I think it's worth talking about. I'm a little sad, to be honest with you, that there isn't more of a hue and cry. I'm glad you're bringing it up. I just wish there were lots more Juliannas all over the place that were doing this kind of thing, because it's so obscene that it kind of takes your breath away. Let me focus in on it. Forbes magazine, which celebrates itself as a capitalist tool, their phrase.
They embrace that as a
Yes. Oh, they are proud of it. They helped to develop a chart a few days ago that made the rounds on social media that showed a list of, I think it was 8 or 9 billionaires, and how many extra billions they made between the low point of the stock market on March 18th and sometime last week. And, it's tens of billions of dollars that they all became richer. So let me say it as starkly as I can. The richest people in America became markedly richer across this so-called pandemic, while over 50 million of their fellow citizens had to file unemployment claims because they lost their jobs, their incomes, all of the disruption of your life that those things mean and have always meant. You could not have a more extreme example of the old saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. It boggles the mind on many levels. So here's the simple explanation, because there's no mystery. Desperate to avoid a total economic collapse, the Federal Reserve started right away, once this virus hit and once the economy started to crash. The Federal Reserve did what it always has done, what it did back in 2008 with the other crash, what it did back in the year 2000 with the so-called dot-com crash. It created trillions of dollars and pumped them into the economy, which means lending that money to the banks, lending it to insurance companies, corporations, and so on. What those companies, the banks and so on, did was not, as the story goes, to build up the economy, to hire people, to produce more. And the reason they didn't do that is simple capitalism. They didn't do that because when you have 52 million people unemployed, you can't sell what you already have. And there's no point in producing more. So where did all the money go? Answer: stock market. We had a fantastic inflation, not surprising when you're pumping up the money supply, but we had it in a very limited area, namely the stock market. If you own stocks, and remember, the top 5 or 10% own 80 to 90% of the shares in our economy, in the stock market. If you own shares, you've done real well. If you don't, you haven't. Simple, obvious. But as a policy, it is unspeakably obscene because it has the effect of making the richest people richer and leaving everyone else in an economic situation of frightening uncertainty, loss of wealth, loss of security. I mean, it is, as I say, beyond words what this economy is doing. And I make you a prediction, which I don't normally do. Historians looking back on this period will only shake their heads wondering how it was possible for the American people to accept this kind of economic policy. And I wish I could tell you that the Democrats are radically different and are deeply opposed to all of this. They're not. They are, yes, they're not as bad as the Republicans. That's always been their claim to fame. And here again, they're not as bad. But wow, are they coming up short in terms of the kind of really profound change that an absurdly obscene situation like this demands.
We're speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, economist well known for his work on Marxian economics and class analysis. Professor Wolff is the host of Economic Update with Richard D. Wolff, author of many books, including the forthcoming The Sickness is the System, focusing on the economics surrounding the coronavirus. And we're looking forward to that coming out in the fall. And I hope to talk to you about that as it comes up. So as you mentioned, the recovery, I don't even know if I'd call it a recovery. I mean, they're talking, this is what the New York Times this is how the New York Times reported it. This is word for word from the Times. The recovery has been fueled by the recovery, meaning, you know, there was a crash and then the big spike that's happening right now has been fueled by trillions of dollars pumped into financial markets, as you said, by the Federal Reserve, and enormous spending by the government. And this is the thing that gets me about the New York Times reporting: to protect American workers and businesses from the worst of the downturn. What would Marx have agreed with this strategy about how to protect American workers and businesses from the worst of the coronavirus fueled downturn?
That reminds me of the old joke, you know, with friends like these, you know, you don't need enemies.
Right.
This is unspeakable. You have protected the American working class by taking us back to the levels of suffering of the Great Depression. Remember, we have been teaching for a century, we economists, we've been teaching people that the worst moment in the history of capitalism was the Great Depression. And it is measured by having tens of millions of people unemployed, by having the mass of working class people use up whatever little savings they could accumulate, the interruption of educations, the destruction of families, all of which is happening now, and happening on a scale that we only can compare to the Great Depression. So how is this a protection of workers? That requires the mentality, and let me be honest with you, of the New York Times, which is part of the establishment. For them, you know, they're the ones who own the shares. They're the ones who are part of that community, very small minority in this country, of people who sit at the top and who think that if you improve their stock portfolio, why somehow magically everybody else is being helped equally. It isn't true. A walk through any American city today will show you that. The empty stores, the people on the street living hand to mouth. I mean, it's everywhere obvious, except if you're in the New York Times, and I don't mean to pick on them, you could find it in many other newspapers, and these are owned by big corporations who in turn are the people who have the stock portfolios. It's kind of pathetic that an editor who in some sense ought to know better allows lines like that to go through. I mean, I'm not excusing it, but they're so out of touch that they don't even find it as remarkable as you properly did by putting it forward now for our attention.
Professor Wolff, you and I have been doing I've been doing interviews with you mostly since even before or during the time of Occupy Wall Street. And I remember sitting in your home. We brought all the camera equipment and we sat in your home and we did an interview about how capitalism was about to hit a wall anyway. And now with the coronavirus, I remember you talking about it, just one little thing that could touch off an enormous destruction of our economy, of the systems that we come to rely on. Coronavirus seems like a big tinder on top of another fire, which would have been electing a fascist who clearly, from today's news, there's no denying it anymore, is in bed with dictators and he's treasonous. Anyway, I know you don't want to get involved in that, but do you how can you comment on, having predicted that the capitalism was likely to fail us, and now that it is failing us, can you just give us your perspective on how we, I don't know, kind of you saw this coming, I guess, and did it play out the way you thought that it did already? And then where are we going from here in your estimation?
Well, partly yes, I did predict it, and I am not at all the only one. But you can never 100% predict it. So yes, I got part of it, and the other part I didn't get. And let me explain. It takes no great genius to tell you that there's going to be a crash in capitalism. And the reason it takes no genius is if you've ever studied the history of capitalism over the last 300 years or so that we've had modern capitalism, here's what you discover, and what my teachers taught me. Every 4 to 7 years, on average, 4 to 7 years, there's an economic downturn. The system crashes. Sometimes we're lucky, and the crash doesn't cut very deep and doesn't last very long. Other times, like the 1930s, like 2008, it cuts very deep and it lasts a long time. We know we're going to get it every 4 to 7 years on average, but we never know exactly how long it'll take. Nobody can predict that. And we never know exactly what will trigger it, what will be that final thing that makes it happen. And the final thing we don't know is what else will be happening in the society at the time of the economic downturn. Because whatever else is happening can make the downturn worse than usual or milder than usual. So those are the things we don't know. So when you came into my living room there and we talked, I was telling you, look, the last bottom, the last crash was in 2008 and 9. Okay, do the arithmetic. If on average every 4 to 7 years there's a crash, and it's now been over 10 years since the last one, we're overdue, and it's really going to happen pretty soon. I can't tell you exactly what it'll be like. I can't tell you what'll happen with it to make it worse or better, but I can surely tell you that it's coming, and we're going to have it really soon. Last little point. When it takes longer than the average, that is more than 4 to 7 years, the unfortunate part of that story is the longer it takes, the worse it's likely to be, because it's accumulated all the problems that capitalism has kicked them down the road. And then when they all happen together, it becomes harder to get yourself through it.
Michelle Obama, in her speech at the DNC, said, quote, "Believe me, if you think this is bad, it can get much, much worse." I'm assuming you would agree with this.
Well, you can already see it, Julianna. We have not solved our racial problem. I'm being as polite as I can. And here it is coming right back at us for all the reasons that that Black Lives Matter and others have made clear. We haven't solved our debt problem. We have greater debt of the government, corporations, than ever in our history. That sits there, a time bomb waiting to go off. And now we have the coronavirus and the future of a virus that, if another one comes, which we know nature produces, it has for thousands of years, that's not going to stop. What we've learned is that our system is stunningly unprepared, stunningly unable to cope and to contain it. I mean, we're accumulating problems, any one of which would test a reasonable government, and we have too many, and we don't have a reasonable government. We're being given a choice this November that is a symptom of how bad it is.
Talk more about that.
Well, you know, I don't want to be a predictor. I really don't want to. I don't want to, but I will, because you're a friend, and I want to answer your questions. I am amazed that a country in as extreme a set of problems as we have, now having 4 years of watching the incapacity of the existing president to do anything other than basically make it all worse. I mean, he was running on the economy. Now he can't run on the economy because the economy is the worst it's been in a century. He was running on making America great again. America under the pandemic is in a disaster situation that is going to play itself out for decades to come. You'd think a society in as extreme a set of problems as this, and I haven't even mentioned half a dozen others that I could, would be putting forward new, dynamic people with a new set of solutions to offer us, so that we could have some confidence that by voting for this one or that one, we're getting a program that maybe will work. But instead, we're getting, a person who has proven he can't solve anything, and a person who has been part of the problem for his entire adult life. What are we doing here? What kind of a luxury of not solving our problems do we imagine ourselves to be in, that we give ourselves this as our choice? I mean, this is, for me, absolutely stunning. And you can see it in a kind of concrete way, if I can be a little bit personal for a minute. I worked for a while with the father of Kamala Harris. He's an economist like me, and he's a left-wing economist like me. And this is his daughter. And, the old saying that the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree, well, that's wrong. The acorn can fall very far. A bird can pick it up and take it miles away. And here we have, therefore, a person who could have absorbed, by the way, one of the sharpest, finest economists I've ever worked with, Donald Harris, her father. But
I didn't notice him getting a lot of play on the ticket last night or tonight.
No. All attention goes to her mother. Very careful. The bird that took the acorn away, that gets the attention, not the tree that produced the, together with the mother, obviously produced the child. But my point is, she left all of that and moved into the establishment center. That's what her career led her to do. And, I have no comment that she made those choices. She went in that direction. But that brings her now into a situation completely different from what we've had before, requiring dramatic, radical change. And here's the woman, the only kind of new face among all of these old politicians. Here's a younger new face. And what has she excelled in? Building a career on being acceptable to the very same old faces that run American politics. It is a tragic kind of behavior which strikes me, and you're more psychologically educated than I am, Julianna, so you tell me, this strikes me as an election that is an exercise in denial in a society that wants to believe not the crisis it's in, but the normalcy it wish it were in, and it's going to go through a political theater that celebrates a normalcy that is a fantasy.
That's well said. I watched the DNC last night, and I came away thinking, the thoughts that they were probably hoping that a viewer would think, it would be good to have a compassion at the minimum. It'd be better to have a compassionate person than a narcissistic sociopath in the White House, irregardless of policy. I walked away with that thought, not agreeing necessarily with it, but sort of what what I thought they were offering me. Then the other thought was, oh, I would like to climb into my grandpa's arms and have him hug me right now. And I think people, my grandparents are passed away. I think people do want that denial of just like, if we could just get rid of Trump, everything's going to be okay. But Professor Wolff, you were here telling me while Obama was in office, you know, that these crises are recurring if the system remains in place.
Absolutely. And you know,
this is not hopeful, Professor Wolff.
No, it's not hopeful, but look, you have to start by being honest. You know, I'm reminded of the AA meeting, which says you better stand up and admit you have a problem. Mm-hmm. That's why you're here. Not as a condemnation, but as the kind of admission that's the beginning of a healing process. I mean, you're not going to fix it if you don't admit that it's busted, that it's broken, that it needs your attention. And I'm afraid that our economy is a little bit like that. And if you cheer, we're going to make it great again, or if you cheer that I'm not the sociopath you see over there, I'm a calm guy, I don't say crazy things, I don't bring people here who point guns at protesters for no reason, I'm not going to behave like this. That's his campaign, by the way. As far as I can tell, you know,
it's still better. I know.
Yeah, I'm not that guy. You know, yeah. I'm not him. Yeah, I'm less disturbing than this guy. And you know, there's an awful lot of people in America, and this is the serious part. There's an awful lot of people in America whose economic situation is being undermined step by step. This little thing, that little thing.
All of us, everybody.
That's right. And you're not dealing with this. You're giving us a theater instead of that, a fantasy instead of a solution. But you only can go so far with this kind of theatric before the relentlessness of the problem becomes the dominant thing in your life. I mean, I'm a professor. The number of times I sit with students, tears coming down their faces, men and women, explaining to me the horror of the conversation they had last night with their father or their mother as they learned that the money for the next semester's bill isn't there, it can't be paid, and now they have to leave college or leave graduate school having accumulated $63,000 worth of debt with not even the degree to show for it and no chance of getting it. You know, their lives are coming to a kind of abrupt end in their minds, and all of this is unnecessary. None of this is required. They are the victims of a set of problems that are not being addressed. And boy, if the people who want to make a progressive solution cannot get their act together to become clear about that and offer a way forward, then those people in their upset are going to go with the other kinds of theatric. I mean, we have to face that. That's where we are. And the luxury of some nice grandpa figure with a nice young woman who talks just like him, this is not a solution to anything.
Professor Wolff, we have seen over the course of since Occupy Wall Street and up until the very moment with Trump pretty much waking up some of the sleeping radicals out there to the situation that's going on, with your help, I might add. We have a progressive movement that is growing. They're winning seats. You know, everyone in the country knows Bernie Sanders' name and platform at this point, really. And your work has gone so far, as you've said in interviews before, you're being called on to explain things in places where you never thought you would be called on before. So I don't think we're not there yet, because we're not running, the Democrats are not running a progressive candidate. We don't have a viable third party that can run a true progressive candidate, but we're on our way. And I'm seeing hopeful things. What do we say to folks who understand that a Joe Biden, Kamala Harris ticket is the denial ticket, And it is it's probably better than this crazy guy ticket. Noam Chomsky is even out there. I'm going to paraphrase what he said, is like, these people suck, but you should definitely vote for them. What are your thoughts about, the pragmatic moment that we're in when it comes to choosing whether to show up at the voting booth or not? Your thoughts?
Well, I've made a decision for myself. So let me tell you what that is. And if it's persuasive to others, well, then fine. And if not, we'll continue talking. My emphasis is not going to be on the differences between Kamala Harris and Biden on the one hand and Pence and Trump on the other. I think Americans are going to learn a good bit about that. They probably already do know a good bit about that. My guess is most folks have made up their mind already where they line up on all of that. I'm going to focus on the issue you began your comment with, namely that there has to be a new movement in America, whether it takes the form of an association or a movement or a project or a political party. I'm not against that at all. I do think there are many arguments that the American political system has been corrupted, that having only two parties is a strange game. I've always enjoyed mocking that a little bit, that we Americans want to be able to go into a store and have 27 varieties of dish detergent to choose among and 37 varieties of toothpaste to choose among. We want freedom of choice, except when it comes to political parties, where two is just a lovely number, and having more than two to choose from is nothing we want to have anything to do with. I mean, it seems to me the political choices ought to be more important as a range than the toothpaste choices, but that's not the way our country works. So for me, I'm going to focus on building genuine alternatives, developing the strategy, saying honestly what's wrong in American society without the fear of people accusing us of being, I don't know, disloyal or whatever. No more of that. I'm not going to listen to that anymore. I did earlier in my life. I'm not going to do that anymore. And I'm going to search for solutions, and I'm going to put them out there, and I'm going to work on building organizations that do that kind of thing. They don't have to agree with my particular recipe, but to do that sort of thing, to build real alternatives so that we're not stuck with a choice between a Trump and a Biden, that we have other better choices to present to the American people. And I think that's a project that can work, because I think the choices of Trump and Biden, while they're the dominant choice right now, I understand that. I think Americans by the thousands are every day realizing that that choice is not acceptable. That's not a big enough range of things we ought to have on the table to choose from in terms of making our lives better. This is bad and the lesser evil. And we've been in that box for a long time, choosing always the lesser evil as it and its alternative move over to the right. I think we are coming now with this crash, with this pandemic, to begin to understand we've used up the delaying tactics, the denial. We now have to get to deal with the problems. And I think a progressive movement that said that and said it well would then be able to in one, two, or more organizations, develop programs that people could respond to by saying, I want that one to get a chance to shape this country rather than what we have had in its Republican or its Democratic variations.
Here are some of my thoughts about that. We're in this present moment where if Joe Biden does win and the economy continues to falter, which it will, because the reason that it's faltering isn't just Trump. Absolutely. It is the system, as we've discussed here today and before, then perhaps people will actually, there will be more of a stampede than even under Trump to progressive platforms that are being put forward. The Green New Deal, for example, Medicare for all, free education, those, college education, those kinds of things, because people will break the denial of, oh, if we just get a normie back in there, we'll be okay. We'll see in the next 4 years. I think for me, I'm going to vote for Joe Biden, and I might even have to go back and vote in the voting booth in Brooklyn if I can't get my thing mailed to me. Because I feel that it's a pragmatic move on a chessboard, but I'm voting for him with my eyes open, not in the way that the Democratic National Committee would like me to vote, just to fall in love and think we have a hero. I think people are starting to wake up to the fact that we're not going to have a hero. And even if we had gotten a Bernie Sanders, presidential powers are limited. And, we need to kind of fight this on all fronts. That one elected official is not going to do it. It has to be a movement, which is what everyone is saying, and which is what I am also seeing. So I would like to see, when the movement is in the streets, the people not getting shot in the face by rubber bullets, and the journalists not being bagged over the head and dragged into a van, and I think that Biden may not do that. So, but I think that the movement is going to continue. My concern is that people who were in the center, who are very concerned about Trump, might just go back to sleep if and when Biden gets in, and they won't continue to, push for more progressive legislation. But that's a concern I'm more willing to deal with than say, hey, what about another 4 years of Trump? And that I'm going to, you feel free to respond to that. I do want to talk to you, and I know we're kind of going long on time, but I do want to talk to you about a couple of other things that have been said on this show over the last few days. One is about what is happening in education right now. I'm looking for a school for my child, and every time I find one, I'm too afraid to sign her up because of what may happen, and then the pressures of having in-home childcare. And we discussed the fact that the educational system, what we have for education, is basically crumbling right now. And one of the structures that upholds our society is public education, also private education, but a system of education where the kids leave the house during the day and then the people can go to work. That is being forced upon us, and it's not going to be available. And every parent I talk to is like, is it going to be okay come September 15th, or are we all going to be back in the house with the masks? What's happening in the states, in Georgia, what's happening at Notre Dame and these other colleges who have already started is indicating that is exactly what is going to happen. We are all going to be back in our homes with our masks on, with no childcare and no educational opportunities other than sitting your kid in front of a screen all day, which is it's far less than an educational opportunity.
Well, let me respond on that point of education, since I think it encapsulates everything. And let me do it in a dramatic way. Over this summer, that is roughly the period, for the larger period, once we knew how bad this was, say from roughly middle April to right now, the expensive, elegant private schools of America have spent those months investing a good bit of money in reorganizing their programs so that the classes were much smaller, so that the children, or whatever age we're talking about, could be situated 6 or more feet from one another, that a very small number would interact with a teacher in an environment that was carefully maintained, with disinfectants, with air circulation, with every conceivable safety mechanism put into place. Those expensive schools would not dare go to their parents and confront them with what you just described, a choice between risking literally their own lives by sending their children into an unsafe place, or having to live with the chaos of a household, with the need to have some kind of child care while you're going to work, if you're going to do that, or even if you work from home, when children need your attention and all of that. We could have as a nation, and we should have as a nation, been doing the same thing for everybody, that the few elite educational institutions, what they were doing. But like everything else in our capitalist system, what was done for those at the top isn't made available for everybody else, so that the rest of us are being told, and I, by the way, am in the same boat. Am I going to go back into the university classroom?
No.
Risk my life, risk the health of myself and all the people that I might infect, and the ditto for all my students who have to ask themselves the same question. Well, we shouldn't have been in that position. Over the summer, what should have been done in the classrooms we have always used is a transformation, but it wasn't done, and the money wasn't spent because they didn't have it or they didn't want to spend it. But okay.
Well, they were just waiting to see if Trump would give people some masks and tamp this thing down.
That's right. Or give them the money to make it safe. But there was no priority on mass education, and there was no money to be made available there. You made money available to those at the top, but you didn't make money available for the mass of our next generation. I mean,
he made Betsy DeVos a position as education. Education and public education was not on the forefront of his, destroying it was clearly part of and the coronavirus seemed to help him with his various plans here.
Absolutely. And I should say, though, that the mass of private schools didn't do it either. They didn't want to spend the money. They hoped someone else would solve the problem. They hoped the problem would go away. I mean, it is.
Professor Wolff, let me tell you another little thing that I think you'd be interested, because I've been looking for preschools, and one of the ones I looked at is like a private, expensive one. Yeah. And not that we can afford it, really, but a friend of mine said always apply because they have money and they need students. So, anyway, I applied anyway. And this is the interesting thing. I applied to this school and I said, what happens if they close down the doors again, if the state closes down the doors? And here was her answer. They don't give you your fucking money back. Excuse me. So if you're going to send your kid to a private school, you need between 10 and 50, depending on how much it costs, $1,000 to just give away to the school, even if your kid doesn't get to go there and still has to sit at home in front of a screen, which does not fill their social emotional needs, right?
Well, it is so bad, Julianna. I mean, I don't want to exchange stories. You tell me a bad story, I'll tell you even a worse one. But look, an awful lot of the universities that I know of, some of which I have studied in and others of which I've taught in, are having various students come back for a semester or to take some classes, not others. They want that tuition money. That's what this is about. They want the dorm fee to be paid and so forth, because they're desperate that their finances are in trouble. And so they are working themselves into a crazy place, knowing that people now are desperate for jobs in a shrunken economy. It may be important to have that Yale degree after your name, and so you'll pay. Who cares what education you get? You just need that piece of paper that you can wave at a potential employer. I mean, but these are signs. We're running out of time, but maybe here's the punchline. These are signs of a society that is falling apart. These are not the signs of a society that is able to cope. I mean, let me give you the example of New Zealand. And they have a woman prime minister there, a remarkable woman prime minister. And the other day, Mr. Trump decided to attack her by saying they have had a resurgence. They have had a resurgence. They had 9 new cases after going for a while without any. So the rest.
Oh my gosh!
Yes, to the rest of the world, and I mean this, across the world, the following headline appeared. And Americans have to understand that this is happening every day. First, there was a picture of Ms. Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, talking very seriously about the measures they're taking with 9 new cases. And then there's a picture of Mr. Trump attacking her for a resurgence. And then there's the explanation at the bottom. On the same day that New Zealand had 9 new cases, the United States had 42,000 new cases. So, but in the world that Mr. Trump lives in, and in the media that he controls, the United States is in a position to criticize New Zealand. I mean, these are signs of a society that is gone, that has crumpled to the point where denial and theater and fantasy are so overwhelming that the underlying reality has literally been lost sight of. This is what, the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire and the British Empire, when they fall apart, these are some of the symptoms that we see. And I don't want to leave you with that. On the other hand,
we're kind of out of time.
We're out of time, and there is a virtue and a benefit in facing up to these things as I said, as the first step in understanding, wow, we're going to have to take some pretty big steps and big changes if we're going to get out of this dead end that we find ourselves in.
You've been watching ACT TV. I've been speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, economist, well known for his work on Marxian economics and class analysis. Find Economic Update with Richard Wolff on, it's on a lot of radio stations, but if you want to watch it, go to YouTube. It's there. His forthcoming book, The Sickness is the System, will be coming out soon. Do you know what the drop date is on that, Richard?
I think mid-September.
Okay, so we'll get on it. That is excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. Please follow Professor Wolff on Twitter at Prof. Wolff, WOLFF. And we look forward to having you back for more conversations next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julianna. I look forward to it.
If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe to us here on ACT TV. I'm Julianna Forlano. You can find me at Julianna Forlano on the Twitters. I think Professor Wolff it was wonderful to hear his stance. And then I think he also made the argument right at the end about how, we're in such deep denial and insanity with this president that at least we have a sane candidate on the other end. Hopefully we can cause him to be further sane if we can. We'll keep our eye on things.